You are tired, even though you slept 8 hours, even though it was the weekend, even though you took the day off and went on holiday and came back somehow more depleted than before you left. Most explanations for this fail. Burnout, they say. Adrenal fatigue, vitamin D, screen time, cortisol, sleep apnea. Any number of reasonable partial answers, none of which fully account for the phenomenon you wake up to on a Tuesday morning, 8 hours of sleep behind you, somehow more tired than the night before. There is another explanation. It is 2,500 years old. It is contained in a single word, in a language most people in the world have never heard. And it is, almost certainly, what is actually happening to you. The word is sankhara. It appears in some of the oldest texts on the planet, the Pali Canon, recorded by hand on palm leaves in northern India in the 3rd century BC, copying a teaching that was already 400 years older than that. It is one of the most important words in Buddhism. It is also, by a wide margin, the worst translated. Open any dictionary. You will find mental formations, volitional formations, sometimes simply thoughts. These translations are not wrong exactly. They are like describing a hurricane as weather, technically accurate, completely inadequate. To understand what sankhara actually means, and what it has to do with the bone-deep tiredness most people carry through their days, you have to meet a man who spent 60 years inside this word. His name was Buddhadasa Bhikkhu. He was born in 1906 in Phumriang, a small village in southern Thailand, the son of a Chinese Thai shopkeeper. He had a younger brother. They worked at the family store as boys, weighing rice and selling fish sauce. He ordained as a monk at 20. He left Bangkok almost immediately. The capital, its temples, its bureaucracy, its rituals, felt to him like a museum, a beautiful museum, but a museum. He went south, to a forest near his home village. He found a clearing, overgrown, full of insects, surrounded by rubber trees, and he stayed there. He called the place Suan Mokkh, the Garden of Liberation. He lived there until he died in 1993. In 60 years, he became one of the most influential Buddhist teachers in the modern world, and almost no one outside of the Thai forest tradition knows his name. He taught from a simple wooden hut. He wrote, in plain Thai, accessible to anyone, over 100 books. And he had, at the center of his teaching, a single argument, that 99% of human suffering came from one source. Not from circumstance, not from other people, not from what had happened, from sankhara. Here is what the word actually means. Not thoughts, not feelings. Sankhara is the activity of the mind constructing things that are not actually there. It is the moment-to-moment fabrication that the mind does, automatically, ceaselessly, almost always invisibly, when it takes a neutral situation and assembles it in real time into a problem. A friend doesn't reply to your text. That is the situation. What the mind builds, the why, the meaning, the implication, the rehearsed response, the imagined argument, the body sensation that goes with the imagined argument, that is sankhara. A meeting is scheduled for tomorrow. That is the situation. What the mind builds in advance, the script of it, the worry about it, the possible outcomes, the rehearsal of what you will say, that is sankhara. You wake up in the morning, that is the situation. What the mind builds in the first 30 seconds, the calendar of the day ahead, the worry about the email you didn't send, the tightening in your shoulders, the preemptive irritation about the commute. That is sankhara. It is not what is happening. It is what your mind is constructing on top of what is happening. And here is the specific point Buddhadasa returned to. hundreds of times across his 60 years of teaching. It is exhausting. Most people, he said, do not realize that sankhara is something the body experiences as work. Sustained worry has roughly the same metabolic cost as moderate physical exertion. The nervous system does not distinguish between solving a problem and rehearsing a problem. The cortisol spike is identical. The muscle tension is identical. The sleep disturbance is identical. You can spend 12 hours sitting still in a chair, and still your body in the morning will feel as though it has been somewhere, because it has been somewhere. It has been inside 1,000 small fabricated scenarios, each of them a brief expenditure of energy. This is why rest does not always rest you. If you sleep 8 hours and dream, vividly, anxiously, constantly, about meetings you have not yet had, conversations you are not actually having, and consequences that have not occurred, you have not slept 8 hours. You have spent 8 hours doing sankhara in a horizontal position. There is now modern research that confirms the diagnosis. Sleep researchers have documented for decades a phenomenon called non-restorative sleep. Sleep that meets all the architectural markers of normal rest, but leaves the sleeper unrefreshed. The strongest predictor, in study after study, is not sleep duration. It is not sleep apnea. It is not screen time before bed. It is rumination. The technical term is repetitive negative thinking, the mind's tendency to loop on the same thought, the same conversation, the same fear, dozens of times in a single hour. It is a near-perfect modern translation of sankhara. The Buddha had described it. Buddhadasa had described it. They had named the mechanism. They had warned about it. 2,500 years before the first sleep lab existed. Now, why does this matter? Because if you are exhausted on a Tuesday morning and you have already eliminated the obvious things, you've slept enough, you've eaten, you've cut the alcohol, you've checked your blood work, and you are still tired, then somewhere in the day your mind is doing more work than you realize. You are not lazy. You are not weak. You are not failing at something you should be able to do. You are running, every minute of your waking life, a low-grade simulation engine, modeling threats, rehearsing conversations, constructing futures, repairing pasts. And, like any simulation engine, it has a metabolic cost. Buddhadasa's argument was simple. It was not romantic. It was almost mechanical. He said, "Stop the fabrication, and the tiredness lifts. Not because anything in the outside world has changed, but because the engine has finally been turned off." The practice he taught for this was, by Western standards, embarrassingly simple. He called it watching the breath without commentary. You sit. You notice that breath is happening. You do not try to deepen it, slow it, fix it, count it, or manage it. You simply observe it, for as long as you can. The instruction sounds trivial. Anyone can do it. In practice, almost no one can do it for more than 4 or 5 seconds before the mind begins fabricating again. That is not failure. That is exactly the diagnosis being confirmed. The fact that the mind cannot stop building things, even for the duration of a single inhale, is the very thing exhausting you. Buddhadasa's promise was that, with practice, the gap between the thoughts grew. Not the gap between the breaths in the body, the gap between the breaths in the mind. That gap, he said, is where the tiredness ends. Buddhadasa Bhikkhu died on the 8th of July 1993 at his hut at Suan Mokkh. He was 87 years old. In his last years, his eyesight was failing. His hearing was failing. His back was failing. A young monk who lived nearby in those years later said something that stayed with the people who heard it. He said, He moved very slowly at the end, but he never seemed tired. None of us could understand it. The young monk thought about it for a long time before he added the second sentence. I think he had simply stopped doing the thing that makes most people tired. You are not going to move to a forest in southern Thailand. You are not going to spend 60 years in a wooden hut. You don't need to. But something Buddhadasa said is for you. Otherwise you wouldn't still be here. It is this. Most of what you call thinking is not thinking. Real thinking, analyzing a problem, choosing a course of action, doing creative work, costs almost no energy. The mind, when it is genuinely engaged, is extraordinarily efficient. What costs energy is sankhara, the constant, automatic, low-grade fabrication of scenarios that are not actually happening. If you are tired and you cannot find the source, that is, almost always the source. Tomorrow morning, before you reach for your phone, before you begin the day's planning, before the engine starts up, try this. Sit for 90 seconds. Notice that breath is happening. Do not improve it. Do not deepen it. Do not count it. Watch the gap between two thoughts. You may not find one on the first morning, or the second, or the 10th, but the day you do, even briefly, you will recognize something that has been described in many languages by many people for 2,500 years. It is not relaxation, it is not peace, it is the absence of the engine that has been quietly draining you every hour for as long as you can remember. Sankhara, finally, at rest. In the rubber forest of Suan Mokkh, the wooden hut where Buddhadasa lived for 60 years is still standing. The monks who keep it have not changed anything. Every morning before sunrise, the wind moves through the rubber trees outside. It is not noise. It is not silence. It is something that the breath, when it is finally watched, also turns out to be a thing that is happening. And nothing else.